Hey guys, tonight we begin with Medieval Inns, a place that exists in the popular imagination as a romantic location, a place where travelers gather to share stories over hearty meals and warm fires, a place where communities form and friendships begin, a place that feels like adventure and camaraderie and the kind of community connection that we've lost in modern life, a place that seems, from a distance, appealing and interesting and full of character and warmth. But the reality of sleeping in a medieval inn was vastly different from the romantic image. The reality was uncomfortable and unsanitary and dangerous in ways we can barely comprehend today. The reality was an experience that would horrify most modern people. The reality was that medieval inns were places where disease spread easily, where violence could erupt without warning, where theft was common, where privacy was completely non-existent, and where the basic conditions of cleanliness and safety that we take for granted today were simply not present. The medieval inn was a place where human beings endured conditions that we would find absolutely unbearable. It was a place where people accepted dirt and filth and disease as normal parts of life. It was a place where the discomfort was constant and pervasive. It was a place where danger was always present. And yet it was also a place where people gathered and found ways to connect with each other and continue their journeys. Please like and subscribe my channel. Before we explore that reality, before we immerse ourselves deeply in what a night in a medieval inn actually involved, before we understand the physical and psychological experience of sleeping in such a place, take a moment to get completely comfortable. Find yourself a place where your body can sink into softness without any resistance whatsoever. Let every muscle in your body release its tension. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears where they've been holding tension all day. Let your arms rest where they naturally want to rest. Your hands can rest on your belly or at your sides or wherever feels natural to you. The space around you should feel safe and protected. It should feel like a space where you can completely let go of everything that's been demanding your attention during the day. If there are blankets nearby, pull them close. Wrap yourself in layers of softness and warmth and protection. Multiple blankets are even better. Create a cocoon of comfort around yourself. Good. Take a moment to feel the difference between your body and the softness beneath you. Feel the support that the surface beneath you is providing. Now take a slow breath in through your nose. Feel that air traveling down through your nasal passages. Feel it moving into your windpipe. Feel it filling your lungs completely. Feel your chest expanding as the air fills the upper parts of your lungs. Feel your belly expanding as the air fills the deepest parts of your body. Hold that air there for just a moment. Let your body absorb the oxygen from that breath. Feel the life in that breath. Now exhale slowly through your mouth, letting that air leave you with a kind of sigh. Let your entire body release the tension that it's been holding. Let yourself settle deeper into the softness beneath you. Again, breathe in slowly through your nose. Feel the air entering your body. Feel the expansion. Hold for a moment. Now breathe out slowly through your mouth. Feel the release. This breathing is your anchor. This breathing is what will help you move deeper into the story and deeper towards sleep. Whenever you need to ground yourself, whenever you need to refocus your attention, you can return to this breathing. Dim the lights if you haven't already. The screen you're watching should be barely visible, just bright enough to guide you through the words, but not so bright that it demands your constant attention. Perfect. Now imagine yourself in the medieval period. Imagine a time before electricity, before plumbing, before modern hygiene. Imagine a time before antibiotics and modern medical science. Imagine a time when disease was a constant threat, and no one really understood how diseases spread. Imagine a time when traveling was dangerous and unpredictable. Imagine a time when the concept of comfort and cleanliness was completely different from what we understand it to be today. Imagine that you're journeying along a road in England or France or Germany, traveling on foot or on horseback. Imagine that you've been traveling for weeks. Your clothes are dirty. Your body is covered with dust and grime from the road. Your legs are aching from walking. Your feet are blistered and sore. You're tired. You're hungry. Your throat is dry. And night is falling. The sun is setting. The light is fading from the sky. The temperature is dropping. And you need a place to sleep. In the distance, you see the lights of a town. You see smoke rising from chimneys. You see the buildings of a small settlement. And you see the inn. The inn is larger than some of the other buildings. The inn is lit up with candlelight coming through the windows. The inn promises warmth and food and a bed to sleep in. The inn represents comfort and safety and a place to rest. And so you head toward the inn. You approach the building. The smell hits you before you even get to the door. The smell of the inn is overwhelming. It's a combination of many things. It's the smell of unwashed human bodies. It's the smell of animals. It's the smell of smoke from the fireplace mixed with cooking smells that are not entirely pleasant. It's the smell of things that are not clean. It's the smell of something that might be decay or might be just the accumulated filth of many people living and eating and sleeping in close quarters without proper sanitation. You hesitate. You think about turning around. You think about sleeping under the stars instead. But the night is cold. The night will be dangerous. There are bandits on the roads. There are wild animals. There are worse things that can happen to a person traveling alone in the darkness. So you steel yourself. You push open the heavy wooden door. And you step inside. Pause. The medieval inn is often romanticized in modern literature and film. We imagine it as a cozy gathering place with a roaring fireplace and cheerful people and plenty of ale and hearty bread and cheese. We imagine it as a place where different social classes mix together in relative harmony. We imagine it as a place of warmth and comfort and safety. But this image is largely a modern fantasy created by people who have never actually experienced the conditions in a medieval inn. The reality of medieval inns was something quite different from this romantic image. The reality was something that would terrify and horrify most modern people. The reality was an experience that combined discomfort, danger, disease, and degradation in ways that are almost hard to imagine. The reality was that medieval inns were places where people accepted conditions that would be considered absolutely unacceptable today. Tonight we're going to explore what it was really like to sleep in a medieval inn. We're going to follow several travelers through a single night at an actual medieval inn. We're going to experience what they experienced. We're going to discover the realities that those people dealt with every time they traveled and needed a place to stay. We're going to understand conditions that they accepted as normal and ordinary and unremarkable. And in doing so, we're going to understand something important about human adaptation and human resilience in the way that people can get accustomed to almost anything if it's the only world they know. The story we're about to experience is not a pleasant story. It's not a comfortable story. It's not a story about happy people having a good time. It's a story about people dealing with difficult circumstances. It's a story about people enduring discomfort. It's a story about people managing danger. But it's also a story about human resilience. It's a story about people continuing on despite overwhelming challenges. And it's a story that will help us understand how much our world has changed and how much we've improved since the medieval period. Pause. There was a woman named Margaret who was traveling to visit her sister. Margaret was 42 years old. She had lived her entire life in a small village in the English countryside. She had never traveled far from her home. But her sister was ill, and her family had asked her to make the journey to visit her sister and help care for her. So Margaret had gathered her courage and her few belongings, and she had begun her journey. The journey was longer than she had expected. She had expected it to take 2 weeks. But the roads were muddy from recent rains. The bridges were washed out. She had to take day tours. She had to wait for ferries. She had lost several days. She had been traveling for nearly 4 weeks now, and she still had another week to go. She was tired. She was homesick. She was worried about whether she would reach her sister before her sister's condition became critical. She was traveling with a merchant named Thomas and his apprentice Robert. Margaret had met them at an inn in a larger town several days ago. She had overheard them talking about traveling in the same direction that she needed to go. She had approached them and asked if she could join them. Thomas had been reluctant at first. Traveling with a woman who was alone was complicated. But Margaret had told him that she would pay for her own lodging and her own meals. And Margaret had offered him money to help protect her on the journey. So Thomas had agreed. Thomas was a wool merchant. He was bringing cloth to sell in the town where Margaret's sister lived. The cloth was valuable. Thomas had invested a lot of money in this cloth. If the cloth sold well, he would make a good profit. If something happened to the cloth, if it was damaged or stolen or lost, it would be a financial disaster for him. So Thomas was constantly worried about his goods. He was constantly thinking about whether they were safe. Robert was Thomas's apprentice. Robert was a young man, probably 19 or 20 years old. He had been apprenticed to Thomas 5 years ago. He was learning the trade of being a merchant. He was learning how to buy goods and how to sell them. He was learning how to navigate the complicated world of commerce. He was also learning how to survive traveling, which was proving to be more difficult than he had expected. There was also a widow named Alice who was staying at the inn. Alice was probably 50 years old, though it was hard to tell because medieval people aged quickly and harshly. Alice was traveling to join her son in a town several days away. Alice had been widowed for 5 years. Her husband had been a farmer. When he died, her son had encouraged her to leave the village and come live with him in the town. Alice had been considering the offer for several years, and finally she had decided to make the journey. There was a young woman named Grace who was also staying at the inn. Grace was probably 18 years old. Grace was traveling with a group of merchants as a servant. Grace's family had arranged for her to work for the merchants in exchange for a small amount of money and to share the profits from their business. Grace was hoping that by working for the merchants for a few years, she could save enough money to either return home and marry or to establish herself independently in a new town. Grace was nervous about the journey, but she was also hopeful about what it might bring. Hugh was the innkeeper. Hugh was 56 years old. He had been running the inn for 30 years. He had inherited it from his father, who had inherited it from his father before that. The inn had been in Hugh's family for at least 100 years. Hugh had spent his entire adult life running the inn. He had seen countless travelers pass through. He had dealt with every kind of situation that could arise in an inn. He was experienced and competent, but he was also tired. He was tired of dealing with drunk people. He was tired of dealing with theft. He was tired of dealing with illness and sanitation problems. But the inn was his livelihood, and so he continued to do the work. Hugh's wife had died 15 years ago. She had died from a respiratory illness that had spread through the inn. One of the travelers had brought the disease with him, and it had infected everyone in the inn. Most people had recovered, but Hugh's wife had not. Hugh had blamed himself for not doing more to prevent the spread of disease. But there was nothing he could have done. In the medieval world, disease was uncontrollable. It spread wherever it wanted to spread. You couldn't stop it. You could only hope that you wouldn't get sick, and if you did get sick, you could only hope that you would recover. Eleanor was a servant who worked in the inn. Eleanor was 16 years old. She was the daughter of Hugh's sister. Eleanor's family lived in a village several miles away. When Eleanor was 13 years old, her family had asked her to come work in the inn. They had asked her because Eleanor was old enough to do useful work, but they had no way to feed her at home. In the village, there were not enough jobs and not enough food. So Eleanor had come to work in the inn, and she had been there for 3 years. Eleanor worked from before dawn until after dark. She woke up at 4 in the morning to start preparing breakfast. She cleaned the common room. She prepared the meals. She served the food and drink. She dealt with the guests. She made the beds. She cleaned up the messes. She did whatever needed to be done. She was constantly busy. She was constantly tired. She had barely a moment to rest. But this was her life, and she had accepted it. Eleanor was dealing with a particular problem that was not faced by the other people in the inn. Because Eleanor was a young woman working in an inn, some of the male guests believed that she was available to them for sexual purposes. Some of the guests would grab Eleanor as she was serving them. Some of them would make crude comments about her body. Some of them would try to follow her to the kitchen or to her small room. Eleanor had developed strategies for dealing with this. She had learned to move quickly. She had learned to keep moving so that no one could grab her. She had learned to stay in the common areas where there were other people around. But she was still at risk, and she was still dealing with the stress of being constantly aware of the danger. Hugh was aware of what was happening. He had told the guests that Eleanor was off limits, but he also knew that he couldn't control everything that happened in the inn. He knew that if Eleanor was assaulted, there was not much he could do about it. The law didn't really protect servants from assault. Eleanor's only protection was her own ability to avoid situations where she was alone with potentially dangerous men. Pause. These people, Margaret, Thomas, Robert, Alice, Grace, Hugh, and Eleanor, would all be staying at the inn on this particular night. They had all arrived at different times. Some had arrived in the afternoon. Some had arrived in the early evening. They had all checked in with Hugh. They had all paid their fees. They had all been shown to their rooms or to the common area where they would be sleeping. And now, as the evening progressed, they were all settling into the inn. They were all dealing with the reality of medieval life. They were all experiencing the discomfort and the danger and the disease risk that came with staying in a medieval inn. They were all trying to get through the night as best they could. What they didn't know was that this would be a particularly difficult night at the inn. What they didn't know was that there would be violence. What they didn't know was that there would be illness. What they didn't know was that before the night was over, they would all be dealing with challenges that would test their endurance and their patience. But they would also discover something about themselves. They would discover something about human resilience. They would discover that people could endure almost anything if they had to. Pause. Margaret arrives at the inn just as the sun is setting. The sun is a large orange ball on the horizon. The light is golden and soft. The temperature is dropping. The wind is picking up. Margaret is tired from walking all day. Her feet hurt. Her legs ache. Her back hurts from carrying a small pack with her belongings. She's hungry. She's thirsty. She wants nothing more than to sit down and rest. As she approaches the inn with Thomas and Robert, the first thing she notices is a smell. The smell hits her like a physical force. It's a combination of many different smells, none of them pleasant. It's a smell of unwashed human bodies. After weeks of traveling, Margaret is used to this smell to some degree. She's used to the fact that people don't bathe regularly. She's used to the fact that people smell. But the smell of the inn is stronger and more concentrated than the smell outside. It's also the smell of animals. There are horses nearby. There are probably chickens and pigs somewhere around the inn. The smell of animal waste is unmistakable. It's pervasive. It gets into everything. It's also the smell of smoke. There's a fireplace burning inside the inn, and the smoke is coming out through the windows and through cracks in the walls. The smoke smells of burning wood, but it also smells like all the cooking that's been happening at the fireplace. It smells like roasted meat and boiled vegetables and bread being baked. It's also the smell of mold and dampness. Medieval buildings are not well constructed. They leak. They get wet. They develop mold. The smell of mold and dampness is very present in the air around the inn. It's also the smell of human waste. The toilets are not far away, and the smell carries on the wind. It's a smell that medieval people dealt with constantly. It's a smell that they tried not to notice, but it was always there. Margaret pulls her cloak closer to her face. She's trying to breathe through her mouth instead of her nose. This is how people deal with medieval odors. This is how people survive in a world where smell is overwhelming and pervasive. You breathe through your mouth. You try not to think about the fact that you're essentially eating the smell. She tries to convince herself that the smell inside will be better than the smell outside. She tries to tell herself that the meal will be worth the discomfort. She tries to prepare herself mentally for what she's about to experience. Thomas pushes open the heavy wooden door. The door creaks on its hinges. It's a loud sound. The door is old. It's been opening and closing for many years. The hinges are worn. The door frame is warped. But it still functions, and it opens to reveal the common room of the inn. Pause. The common room is crowded. It's the evening, so people have gathered for dinner. There are probably about 20 or 25 people in the room, though it seems like more because everyone is talking loudly. The space is filled with the sound of voices talking over each other, laughing, arguing, negotiating. There's a fireplace on one entire wall. The fire is burning, but it's not a clean, contained fire like modern fireplaces. The fire is smoky. The smoke fills the room. There are no chimneys. Or if there are chimneys, they're not working well because medieval chimneys are poorly designed and don't draw smoke effectively. So the smoke just accumulates in the room. It creates a haze. It stings people's eyes. People's eyes water. People cough. This is just something that people accept. There's no alternative. The fire is the only source of heat in the room, so you have to tolerate the smoke. The smell in the common room is overwhelming. It's a combination of many things. It's the smell of the fire and the smoke and the cooking. It's the smell of unwashed bodies. There are at least several people in the room who have not bathed in weeks or months. Medieval people didn't bathe regularly. They thought bathing was actually bad for you because it opened up your pores and let diseases in. So people didn't wash. They wore the same clothes for weeks or months or even longer. Their bodies accumulated dirt and grime and sweat. They smell bad. It's also the smell of animal waste. There's a dog in the corner of the room. The dog has not been house-trained. The dog has relieved itself on the floor several times. The smell is unmistakable. There's a cat somewhere in the room, and cats also don't use designated toilets. They use whatever spot they can find. The smell of animal waste is pervasive. It's also the smell of the rushes on the floor. Rushes are dried plants that people lay on the floor. They help to absorb spills. They provide some insulation from the cold stone floor. But the rushes in this common room are old. They've been there for months, probably. They've never been changed. They are covered with spilled food and spilled drink. They are moldy. They are rotting. They smell like rotten decay. People walk on them and crush them, and the smell gets stronger. It's also the smell of cooking. There's a large pot hanging over the fire. Something is cooking in that pot. It smells like meat, though what kind of meat is unclear. It might be chicken. It might be pork. It might be mutton. It might be something that died in a field and has been sitting around for a while. It's unclear, but it's cooking, and the smell is spreading through the room. Margaret feels slightly nauseated. She's trying not to show it. She's trying to be brave and strong. She's trying to act like an adult who has traveled before and is accustomed to these conditions. But the combination of smells is making her stomach turn. She's been traveling for 4 weeks, so she should be getting used to this. But the smell of the inn is somehow worse than the smell of the road. On the road, you're in the open air. The smells disperse. But in the inn, the smells are concentrated. They are trapped in a closed space. They are magnified. Hugh, the innkeeper, notices the new arrivals. He's sitting at a table near the fire. He gets up from his table and approaches them. He's a large man. He's wearing clothes that might have been clean at some point in the distant past, but are now stained with food and ale and other things that Margaret doesn't want to think about. He has a stained cloth tied around his waist that he uses to wipe things. He's probably used it to wipe his hands, the tables, dishes, and anything else that needs wiping. He uses the same cloth for all of these purposes, so it's probably one of the filthiest things in the inn. Hugh greets them in a loud voice. He's friendly enough. He's businesslike but not hostile. He's assessing them to figure out what they can pay. Margaret looks like she has some money. She's dressed like a middle-class woman. She's not wealthy, but she's not poor either. Thomas definitely has money. He's dressed like a merchant. He's carrying goods. Robert looks like a servant or apprentice, so he might be paying for himself or might be paying by Thomas. Hugh asked about their needs. Do they need a meal? Of course they do. Do they need room for the night? Yes, they do. He quotes prices. Margaret is surprised by the cost, but she accepts it. This is what it costs to sleep in an inn. The prices vary depending on what kind of room you get. The cheapest option is to sleep in the common room on the floor or on benches. You don't get a private space. You don't get a bed. You just find a place to lie down. That's not ideal, but it's cheap. If you're very poor, that's your only option. The next option is a small room with a bed that you share with other travelers. That costs more. If you're lucky, you might only share the bed with one other person. But it's more likely that you'll share it with 2 or 3 other people. Everyone sleeps in the bed together. There's no privacy. But at least you have a bed instead of sleeping on the cold floor. The best option is a small private room. That's the most expensive option, but it's private. You don't have to share the room with anyone except perhaps your traveling companion if you have one. But the room is still small and cold and uncomfortable. It's just that you're uncomfortable with fewer people. Margaret decides to get a shared room. She doesn't want to sleep on the floor with strangers, but she also doesn't want to spend the money for a private room. Money is precious. She doesn't know how long her journey will take. She doesn't know how many more nights she'll need to stay in inns. So she decides to economize where she can. Thomas and Robert decide to share a different room. They want the privacy to discuss business. Thomas tells Hugh that he and Robert will share a room. Hugh nods. He understands that merchants often want private rooms where they can discuss business and where they can keep an eye on their goods. Pause. Hugh leads them upstairs to show them their rooms. The stairs are narrow and steep. There's very little light. Hugh is carrying a candle, and the light from a candle barely illuminates the stairs. The light flickers as they move. There are shadows everywhere. Margaret is careful not to trip. She's aware that falling down the stairs would be a disaster. There's no hospital. There's no emergency room. If you break a leg, you're in serious trouble. You're probably going to die from an infection or from being immobilized in the medieval world where you can't work. The stairs creak with every step. They are old and worn. They've been used thousands of times. They've never been properly maintained. Some of the boards are loose. Some of them are starting to rot. The stairs could collapse at any moment, though probably they won't. At the top of the stairs, there's a hallway. The hallway is dark except for the light from Hugh's candle. There are several doors along the hallway. These are the rooms. Hugh shows Thomas and Robert to one of the rooms. The room is small. It's maybe 12 feet by 12 feet. There's a bed in it. The bed is covered with a thin blanket. There's no other furniture. There's a small window with shutters that can be closed to keep out the cold. There's a chamber pot in the corner for use during the night. Hugh shows Margaret to a different room. This room is slightly smaller than the room that Thomas and Robert are in. There are already 2 other women in the room. One is a widow named Alice. The other is a younger woman named Grace. Hugh tells Margaret that she'll be sharing the room and the bed with these 2 women. Margaret is not thrilled about this, but she accepts it. This is what she paid for. The bed is a wooden frame with a straw mattress. There's a blanket on top of the mattress. The blanket is thin and worn. There's no sheet. Sheets are a luxury item that only wealthy people have. The bed looks lumpy and uncomfortable. Margaret can already tell that this is not going to be a comfortable night. The room smells. It smells like the same combination of smells that fill the common room, but in a more concentrated form. It smells like human bodies. It smells like straw that's moldy and rotting. It smells like something that might be urine or might be something else that Margaret doesn't want to think about. There's a small window in the room, but it's not really a window in any sense that Margaret would recognize. It's more like a hole in the wall. There's no glass. There's a wooden shutter that can be closed. The shutter is currently open. Cold air is coming through the hole. It's evening, and it's cold. Margaret realizes that the room is not heated. There's no fireplace. There's no source of heat except for the body heat of the 3 women who will be sleeping here. Hugh tells Margaret that dinner is being served in the common room. He'll call for her when it's ready. He leaves the room, and Margaret is alone with Alice and Grace. Pause. Alice and Grace introduce themselves. They are friendly enough. They are also dealing with the reality of sleeping 3 to a bed. Alice is a widow who's been traveling for nearly a week. She's heading to a town where her son lives. Grace is a servant who's traveling with merchants. She's heading in the same general direction. Alice has already resigned herself to the discomfort. She's traveled before. She knows what to expect. She knows that medieval inns are uncomfortable. She knows that beds are shared. She knows that the night will be cold and the room will smell bad and sleep will be difficult. But she's endured these conditions before, and she'll endure them again. Grace is trying to stay cheerful. She's talking about the journey ahead. She's talking about where she's going. She's trying to focus on the positive aspect of travel rather than the negative aspects of the room. She's telling stories about her family. She's telling stories about the town where she's going. She's trying to create a sense of camaraderie with the other 2 women. Margaret sits on the edge of the bed. The bed moves slightly, which makes her realize that it's not entirely stable. The wooden frame is old. The joints are loose. The wood is warped from moisture and age. She's worried that if all 3 of them get into the bed, the frame might collapse. She's imagining what would happen if they fell through the bed frame during the night. She's imagining having to explain the damage to Hugh. She's imagining having to pay for the repair. She realizes that she needs to use a toilet before dinner. She doesn't want to use a chamber pot in front of the other women. She doesn't want to draw attention to herself. She decides to go find the outdoor toilet. She asks Alice where it is. Alice tells her that there's an outhouse out back of the inn. She tells Margaret to be careful because it's dark and it's easy to trip. Margaret makes her way downstairs and then out to the back door of the inn. She finds herself in a small area behind the inn. There are various outbuildings. One of them is the outhouse. It's basically a small wooden structure with a hole in the ground inside. The smell coming from it is absolutely overwhelming. Margaret has to breathe through her mouth. She goes inside. The smell is even worse inside. There are no lights. She has to feel around to figure out where to sit. She's afraid. She's afraid of falling into the hole. She's afraid of what else might be in there. She's afraid of spiders or rats or other creatures. She does what she needs to do as quickly as possible and gets out. When she gets back to the common room, dinner is being served. Everyone is gathering around the tables. Eleanor, the young servant girl, is bringing bowls of the mixture that was cooking in the pot over the fire. It's a kind of stew. It contains meat that's unidentifiable and vegetables and bread. The whole thing is dumped into a bowl. There are no individual portions. Everyone gets a bowl of whatever is being served. Margaret sits at a table with Thomas and Robert and several other travelers. The bowl is placed in front of her. She looks at it. The stew is lumpy. The meat is stringy. The vegetables are soft and possibly overcooked or possibly just poorly prepared. There are bits of something that might be herbs or might be dirt. She has no idea what she's about to eat. But she's hungry, so she picks up a spoon and starts eating. The taste is better than she expected, or maybe she's just so hungry that anything tastes acceptable. There's a lot of salt in the stew, which helps to mask the flavor of questionable ingredients. She eats her bowl of stew. She drinks some ale. The ale is the safest thing to drink. Water can carry diseases. Milk spoils quickly. But ale is brewed with alcohol, and the alcohol kills the bacteria that would make water dangerous. So people drink ale for meals. Even children drink ale. Margaret drinks her ale. It tastes bitter and not particularly pleasant, but it's what's available. As she eats, she observes the other people in the room. There are all kinds of people here. There are merchants like Thomas. There are travelers like her. There are servants and apprentices. There are probably some people here who are up to no good. There are probably some people here who are thieves or bandits. There's no way to tell just by looking. Everyone is wearing medieval clothing, which is more or less the same for everyone regardless of their moral character. The common room is loud and crowded and chaotic. People are talking loudly because the noise is so loud that they have to talk loudly to be heard. People are laughing and sometimes arguing. Someone spills their drink. Eleanor rushes over to wipe it up with her filthy cloth. Someone drops their bowl. Eleanor picks it up and rinses it off with water that's probably not clean and hands it back to them. This is normal in a medieval inn. Cleanliness is not a priority. After dinner, people start leaving the common room to go to their rooms to sleep. Some people are staying in the common room. They're going to sleep on the benches or on the floor using their coats as pillows. This is cheaper, and some people don't have enough money for a room. Margaret heads back upstairs to her room. She's exhausted from traveling and from the sensory assault of the inn. She's ready to lie down, even if the bed is uncomfortable. She's ready to try to sleep. Pause. When Margaret gets back to the room, Alice and Grace are already there. They are beginning to prepare for bed. Preparing for bed in the medieval involves removing some clothing, but not all of it. Women generally remove their outer garments, but they keep their undergarments on. The thought of being naked is horrifying. The thought of being exposed is terrifying. Also, the room is cold. The only warmth will come from huddling together with the other people in the bed. Margaret removes her outer dress. She's left with a long linen undergarment. It's a long shirt that goes down to her ankles. She keeps this on. She also keeps on a kind of head covering because women's hair is supposed to be covered at all times, even at night. This is a convention of modesty that medieval people take very seriously. The three women are preparing themselves for sleep in a small room that offers no privacy. Alice is removing her outer layers while Grace is already lying in the bed, waiting. Margaret feels a moment of awkwardness. She's not accustomed to undressing in front of other people, but she also realizes that this is just how things are in a medieval inn. You have to adapt. You have to accept the lack of privacy. Margaret removes her outer dress. She folds it carefully and places it on a shelf in the room. She's hoping that by folding it nicely, it won't get as wrinkled as it otherwise would. She keeps on her undergarment. She gets into the bed. The three women climb into the bed. Immediately, Margaret realizes that this is going to be an uncomfortable night. The straw mattress is lumpy. The straw is clearly old and compressed and uneven. She can feel individual clumps of straw poking into her through the thin ticking that covers the mattress. The straw smells. It smells old and musty. It smells like sweat and other bodily fluids. The straw has probably never been changed. It's probably been used for months or even years. The bed is narrow. The three of them are lying side by side. There's barely enough room for all three. Grace is against one wall. Margaret is in the middle. Alice is on the other side. They are pressed closely together. Margaret can feel the heat from their bodies, which is actually welcome because the room is cold and getting colder as the evening progresses. But lying so close together is uncomfortable in other ways. She can smell Alice's breath. Alice's breath smells like the stew they ate and like something else that might be tooth decay or might be something else. She can smell the sweat on Grace's clothing. Grace has been traveling for a long time, and her clothes haven't been washed in weeks. She can smell her own body, which smells like the road and the dust and the sweat of travel. Everyone in the room smells. The room is already starting to smell like the accumulated body heat and breath of 3 women in a small space. The blanket that they are sharing is thin and worn. It doesn't provide much warmth. The 3 women are going to have to huddle together to stay warm. There's no modesty here. There's just survival. They are going to have to stay close together and share body heat if they want to make it through the cold night. Margaret tries to get comfortable. She lies on her back. She lies on her side. She tries to position a pillow in a way that's comfortable. The pillow is thin and lumpy. It's filled with straw or feathers that are compressed over time. It doesn't provide much support. Her neck feels unsupported. Her shoulders feel uncomfortable. Alice and Grace are discussing the events of the day and the journey so far. Margaret is trying not to think about how uncomfortable this is. She's trying to focus on getting sleep. She knows that tomorrow they'll be traveling again, and she needs to rest. But sleep is not coming easily. The bed is uncomfortable. Her body aches from traveling. The room is cold. The sounds of the inn are audible through the walls. From the common room downstairs, she can hear people talking loudly and laughing. She can hear the sound of drinks being poured. She can hear music, someone playing some kind of stringed instrument. The noise carries through the floors and the walls. The medieval building is not well insulated. Sound travels easily. From the room next to them, she can hear sounds that suggest other people are trying to sleep in beds that are just as uncomfortable as theirs. There are creaks and groans from the wooden bed frames. There are sounds of people moving around and trying to find comfortable positions. There are sounds of people whispering to each other. There's the sound of someone coughing. The sounds are constant and varied and prevent anything like deep sleep. And from the stables outside, she can hear horses. The horses are restless. They're moving around in their stalls. They're making sounds. They're occasionally neighing. There's a dog barking somewhere. The sounds are constant and varied and prevent anything like deep sleep. The sounds of the inn never really stop. The inn is a place of constant noise. As the evening progresses and more people go to bed, the sound from the common room gradually diminish. But they don't stop completely. There are people who are drinking heavily. There are people who are sleeping in the common room. There are people who are engaging in activities that Margaret doesn't even want to think about. There are people talking in low voices about things that might be illegal or immoral. There are people moving around, getting drinks, going to use a toilet, coming back. Pause. Margaret is lying in the dark. The candle in the room has been blown out. There's no light except for what little light comes through the small window from the moon. But the moon is not full, so the light is minimal. The room is mostly dark. Margaret can see the shapes of things, but not the details. She's lying as still as she can, trying not to move too much so as not to disturb Alice and Grace. But the bed is so small that any movement affects the other people. When she shifts her weight, the mattress shifts. When she changes position, the whole bed rocks slightly. She's trying to ignore the discomfort. She's trying to focus on something else. She's trying to think about her sister. She's trying to think about seeing her sister again. She's trying to imagine the house where her sister lives. She's trying to imagine what it will be like to be in a place where she doesn't have to stay in an inn anymore. But the discomfort is too great. The cold is too penetrating. The lumpy mattress is too uncomfortable. The sounds of the inn are too loud. She can't get her mind off her physical state. She can't relax enough to sleep. She's also aware of Alice and Grace. She's aware that they are breathing. She's aware that they are also uncomfortable. She's aware that they are also awake and also trying to sleep. She can feel their bodies moving as they try to find comfortable positions. She can hear them shifting in the bed. Pause. Around midnight, something happens. Margaret is not asleep, though she's been lying quietly in the dark for hours. Suddenly, there's a loud crash from the common room downstairs. There are sounds of fighting. There are sounds of men shouting and cursing. Margaret hears the sound of breaking glass or pottery. She hears the sound of furniture being overturned. She sits up in bed, startled. Alice and Grace are also awake now. They sit up as well. The 3 of them listen to the commotion from downstairs. Their hearts are racing. They are frightened. They are wondering if they should be afraid. They are wondering if they should lock the door to their room. They are wondering if the fighting will come upstairs. After a few minutes, the sounds diminish. It seems like the fight is over. Someone has probably been thrown out of the inn or constrained somehow. Hugh probably intervened and stopped the fight. But for several minutes, the three women are terrified. This kind of violence is not uncommon in medieval inns. Drunk men fighting over drink or insults or gambling debts. It's part of the reality of inn life. It's something that travelers have to accept, but it's also frightening. It's also a reminder of the danger that exists in an inn. Margaret lies back down. Grace asks if they should go check if anyone was injured. Alice says no. It's not their concern. They should stay in their room. Going downstairs would be dangerous and inappropriate. So they lie in the darkness and listen to the sounds of the inn settling down after the fight. After the fight, the inn is quieter. The sounds from the common room stop. But Margaret's heart is still racing from the shock of the violence. She's thinking about the danger of being in an inn with strangers. She's thinking about how anything could happen, and there's no one to help her. She's thinking about how vulnerable she is. She's thinking about how far she is from home. She's thinking about how much danger there could be on the road, and in inns like this. The cold is becoming a more pressing concern. Despite the body heat of the three women lying close together, the room is becoming very cold. Winter is approaching, though it's not yet the deepest part of winter. But medieval buildings are not insulated. The temperature inside the inn is not much warmer than the temperature outside. The cold seeps in through the walls and through the window. The cold seeps in through the cracks in the walls and the gaps in the doorframe. Margaret is starting to shiver. She tries to generate more body heat by keeping her body as close to Alice as possible. She's trying to conserve her warmth. She's pulling the thin blanket up higher. But the blanket barely covers all three of them. Part of the blanket is always hanging off the edge of the bed, leaving someone exposed. It's hard to sleep when you're cold and uncomfortable and scared. Around 2 in the morning, Margaret's bladder is full and she needs to use the toilet. She's been trying to avoid this. She knows that the thought of getting out of the warm bed and going downstairs and outside in the darkness is terrifying. But the discomfort grows and grows. Eventually, she can't hold it anymore. She carefully extracts herself from the bed without waking Alice and Grace. She makes her way down the stairs in almost complete darkness. She can barely see. She's terrified of falling down the stairs. She's moving very slowly and carefully. She's feeling her way along the wall. She's trying not to make noise. She finds her way outside into the outhouse. The night is clear and cold. The temperature has dropped significantly. It's probably near freezing. The frost is forming on the ground. The outhouse is slippery. The smell is even worse at night because it's concentrated in the cold air. When she gets back to the room, she has to lie down in the cold bed again. The cold is shocking after having been out in the freezing night air. The other women have moved, and there's less space for her to lie down. She has to squeeze back into the space between them. She has to press her cold body against their warm bodies. It takes her a long time to warm up again. She's shivering. She's exhausted. She's starting to feel like she might be getting sick. Around 3 or 4 in the morning, Alice wakes up coughing. She's coughing violently. It sounds like she might be choking. It sounds like she might be dying. Margaret is concerned, but there's nothing she can do. She can only lie there and listen to Alice cough. The coughing goes on for several minutes and then gradually subsides. Alice lies back down, but Margaret can feel that she's awake and uncomfortable. The coughing disturbs the peace of the room. Margaret can hear sound from the hallway. It sounds like Eleanor might have heard the coughing. Eleanor is probably checking to see if everything is okay. But Eleanor doesn't knock on the door or come into the room. She just checks and goes back to her small room off the kitchen. Margaret is worried about Alice's cough. She's thinking about the fact that respiratory illnesses can be serious or even fatal. She's thinking about the fact that she's sharing a bed with someone who might be sick. She's thinking about the fact that she might catch whatever Alice has. She's thinking about the fact that she's still traveling and needs to get to her sister's house and can't afford to be sick. Around 5 in the morning, Grace gets up to use the chamber pot. She does this quietly, trying not to disturb Margaret and Alice. But the chamber pot is in the corner of the room, and using it creates sounds and smells. Margaret can hear the sounds even though she's pretending to be asleep. She can smell the smell even though she's trying not to notice. Around 6 in the morning, the room is still dark, but the darkness is less profound. The first hints of dawn are starting to appear in the sky. The sounds of the inn are changing. The sounds of sleeping people gradually decrease as people begin to wake up. The sounds of the servants beginning their work gradually increase. Eleanor is up early, preparing for the day. There are sounds of her moving around in the kitchen. Margaret has barely slept at all. She's been lying in the cold bed for more than 9 hours. She's closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but sleep hasn't come. She's been constantly aware of the discomfort and the cold and the presence of the other 2 women in the bed. She's been constantly aware of the sounds of the inn. She's been constantly aware of her own vulnerability and her fear. But as dawn approaches, she feels a sense of relief. The night is almost over. In a few hours, she and Thomas and Robert will be leaving the inn. They'll be continuing their journey. The worst part of the day, the night, will be behind them. Pause. Let's follow what's happening in other parts of the inn during this same night. Let's follow Hugh as he deals with his guests and the challenges of running an inn. Hugh has been awake for most of the night. An innkeeper's job doesn't end when the guests go to bed. Hugh has to make sure that the fire in the common room keeps burning. He has to make sure that the premises are secure. He has to be ready to deal with problems if they arise. And problems have arisen. When the fight broke out in the common room around midnight, Hugh had to intervene. The fight was between 2 men who had been drinking heavily. One of them had insulted the other. The insult had escalated into a physical confrontation. The 2 men were fighting, and they had knocked over a table and broken a glass. Hugh had gotten between them and told them to stop. He had told them that fighting in his inn would result in immediate ejection. He had threatened to call the local authorities if they continued. One of the men was angry, but the other realized that he should back down. So they stopped fighting and sat down and continued drinking, but separately. Hugh has had to pay for the broken glass and the damage to the furniture. This is part of the cost of running an inn. Some guests will cause damage. You have to repair the damage or replace the items. You have to hope that the profit you make from the guest stay is enough to cover the cost of the damage. Hugh also has to worry about other kinds of problems. He has to make sure the toilets are functioning, though functioning is a generous term for what they do. He has to make sure there's enough clean water, though cleanliness is a relative term. He has to make sure the kitchen is producing food that won't make people sick, though some sickness is probably inevitable. He is aware that Alice is sick. Her coughing in the middle of the night has disturbed other guests. He is wondering if a sickness is something that will spread to other guests. He is hoping that she's just dealing with a temporary cough and not with something serious. But it's also realistic. In a medieval inn, sickness happens. People get sick. Sometimes they recover. Sometimes they die. You can't prevent it. You can only hope that it doesn't spread too much. He's also dealing with the reality that his daughter Eleanor is being harassed by some of the guests. He's seen it happen. He's seen men grab at Eleanor as she's serving them. He's seen men follow her to the kitchen. He's tried to protect her by telling the guests that she's off limits. But he also knows that he can't control everything that happens in the inn. He knows that if Eleanor is assaulted, there's not much he can do about it. The Lord doesn't really protect servants from assault. He's aware that Eleanor is tired. She works from before dawn until after dark. She's on her feet almost the entire time. She's dealing with customers. She's dealing with cooking. She's dealing with cleaning. She's dealing with the physical and emotional demands of working in an inn. Hugh is aware that Eleanor is exhausted, but he also needs her to keep working. There's no one else to do the work. Around 4 in the morning, Hugh finally allows himself to rest. He lies down in his own room. His room is not much more comfortable than the guests' rooms. It's slightly larger because it's his private space, but it's still cold and uncomfortable. He's asleep within minutes, completely exhausted from dealing with the inn. Pause. Let's follow what's happening with Thomas and Robert in their room. Thomas is worried about his goods. He has them in a locked chest in the room, but he knows that locks can be picked. He knows that determined thieves can get into a locked chest. He's been awake for part of the night, listening to make sure no one tries to steal his goods. He's aware of every sound that comes from the hallway. He's aware of every movement. Around midnight, when the fight breaks out in the common room, Thomas is even more alert. He's worried that the fight might escalate. He's worried that someone might decide to rob the rooms upstairs while everyone is distracted by the fight. He gets out of bed and checks on his locked chest. Everything is still there. Nothing has been taken. He tries to go back to sleep, but sleep is difficult. He's lying in the small bed with Robert. Robert is a good apprentice, but is also a young man, and young men take up a lot of space in the bed. Robert is also snoring. Thomas is lying awake, listening to Robert snore and worrying about his goods. Thomas has invested a lot of money in the cloth that he's carrying. If the cloth sells well, he'll make a good profit. If something happens to the cloth, if it's damaged or stolen or lost, it will be a financial disaster for him. He's been thinking about this the entire journey. He's been thinking about it as he walks down the road. He's been thinking about it when he eats meals. He's been thinking about it when he lies in bed trying to sleep. Around 3 in the morning, Thomas finally falls asleep. But it's not a restful sleep. It's a fitful sleep filled with nightmares about his goods being stolen. He wakes up several times during the night, gasping with panic, thinking that his goods have been stolen. Each time, he gets up and checks the locked chest. Each time, the goods are still there. Robert is also dealing with his own discomforts. He's not sleeping well because Thomas is tossing and turning, and occasionally gasping with panic. Robert is also young and inexperienced, and is finding the experience of sleeping in a medieval inn to be strange and uncomfortable. He's dealing with the cold and the hard bed and the sounds of the inn. He's dealing with the knowledge that the next day he'll have to continue traveling, which will be tiring and possibly dangerous. By the time dawn arrives, both Thomas and Robert have barely slept. They are exhausted. They are looking forward to getting out of the inn and continuing their journey. Pause. Eleanor is dealing with her own challenges during this night. Eleanor worked from before dawn until after dark. Around midnight, she's still in the common room cleaning up after dinner and clearing away the evidence of the fight. She's replacing the broken glass with another glass that's not broken. She's setting the overturned furniture upright. She's trying to clean up the mess. Around 2 in the morning, Eleanor finally gets to retire to her small room off the kitchen. Her room is barely larger than a closet. There's a small cot with a thin mattress. There's a tiny window that looks out onto the kitchen. There's essentially no other furniture, but it's a private space. It's the only place in the inn where she can be alone. Eleanor is exhausted. She's been on her feet for nearly 20 hours. Every muscle in her body aches. Her feet are blistered and sore, but she still has to be up early to start preparing breakfast. She has only a few hours to sleep before she needs to be back at work. She lies down on the cot. The cot is uncomfortable. The mattress is thin and lumpy. But to Eleanor, it's a sanctuary. It's her own space. After the chaos and harassment of the day, it's a place where she can be alone and relatively safe. She hears Alice coughing in one of the upstairs rooms. She hears the sounds of the inn as people move around and use the chamber pots and deal with the discomforts of the night. She hears the sounds of the horses in the stables. She hears the sounds of the wind outside. She hears all the sounds of the inn, and she tries to ignore them and sleep. Eleanor falls asleep quickly despite the noises. She's so exhausted that she can sleep through almost anything. But her sleep is not peaceful. She's dealing with her own nightmares about men grabbing at her and following her and trying to force her to do things she doesn't want to do. She wakes up several times during the night, gasping, thinking that someone is trying to harm her. By the time dawn arrives, Eleanor is ready to get up and start working again. Her few hours of sleep have not been restorative. She's still tired, but she has to keep working. The inn doesn't run itself. The guests need breakfast. The rooms need to be cleaned. The work continues. Pause. To understand the reality of sleeping in a medieval inn, it's important to understand something about medieval psychology and medieval expectations. Modern people have a certain set of expectations about comfort and safety and cleanliness. We expect our beds to be comfortable. We expect our rooms to be warm. We expect to have access to clean water and clean toilets. We expect to not be exposed to disease. We expect to not be in constant danger of violence. Medieval people had very different expectations. Medieval people expected to be uncomfortable. Medieval people expected that their beds would be lumpy and that their rooms would be cold. Medieval people expected to not have access to clean water. Medieval people expected to be surrounded by disease and filth. Medieval people expected that violence could break out at any moment. This is not to say that medieval people enjoyed these conditions. It's not to say that they preferred discomfort. It's to say that they had adapted to these conditions as a normal state of existence. They expected discomfort as a baseline. Any comfort beyond that baseline was seen as a luxury. So when a merchant stayed in an inn and paid for a private room instead of sleeping on the floor of the common room, he was making a conscious choice to pay for comfort. That room was more comfortable than the common room would be. So the merchant felt like he had made a good choice. The fact that the room would seem unbearably uncomfortable to a modern person is irrelevant. By medieval standards, it was a relatively comfortable option. Cleanliness is another issue where medieval expectations were different from modern expectations. Modern people think that cleanliness is essential for health. We wash regularly. We bathe regularly. We wash our hands frequently. We wash our clothes frequently. Medieval people had very different ideas about cleanliness. Many medieval people believed that bathing was actually bad for your health. The belief was that bathing opened up your pores and allowed disease to enter. So people avoided bathing. They might wash their hands and face occasionally, but full bathing was rare. Some people bath once a year. Some people bath less frequently than that. The concept of bathing regularly was not part of medieval life. As a result of this belief and the difficulty of obtaining water for bathing, medieval people were not clean by modern standards. But medieval people didn't expect to be clean. They expected to accumulate dirt and grime. They expected that their clothing would be worn for weeks or months without being washed. They expected that they would smell. They expected that everyone around them would smell. So when Margaret arrived at the inn and was exposed to the overwhelming smell of unwashed bodies and filth, she was experiencing something that was normal in her world. She found it unpleasant, yes, but she also expected it. She had smelled worse. She had smelled the smell of the village where she lived, where people didn't wash and animals were kept close to human habitation. The smell of the inn was not shocking to her in the way it would be shocking to a modern person. Safety and violence are another area where medieval expectations were different. Medieval people lived in a violent world. Violence was a constant part of life. People were stabbed and beaten and murdered. People were robbed. People lived in fear of violence. But they also accepted violence as a normal part of existence. So when Margaret heard the sounds of a fight in the common room, she was frightened. Yes, but she was also experiencing something that was normal in her world. Fights and inns happened regularly. Violence was part of the landscape of the medieval world. So while she was scared, she was also somewhat prepared for the possibility of violence. And after the fight was broken up and normal order was restored, Margaret went back to trying to sleep relatively easily. She had experienced violence and survived. She expected that things would continue to be normal after that. In her world, violence was just something that happened sometimes. It wasn't safe or comfortable, but it was normal. Disease is another area where medieval expectations were different from modern expectations. Modern people are used to the idea that we can prevent disease through cleanliness and sanitation and vaccination. We think a disease is something that can be prevented or at least significantly reduced. Medieval people had no concept of germs or the ways that disease spread. Medieval people believed that disease spread through miasma, which was bad air. Medieval people believed that disease could be prevented by avoiding bad air, by eating the right foods, by balancing the humors in their bodies through bloodletting. None of these beliefs were correct, but they were the medical beliefs of the time. As a result, medieval people didn't expect to be able to prevent disease. Medieval people expected that they would get sick sometimes. Medieval people expected that sickness might kill them. So when Margaret was exposed to Alice's cough, she was frightened because she knew that respiratory illness could be serious or even fatal. But she also expected that she might get sick. Illness was part of the normal risks of living in the medieval world. So Margaret didn't expect the conditions in the inn to be sanitary. She didn't expect the water to be clean or the food to be prepared in clean conditions or the toilet to be clean. She knew that the conditions were not clean. But she also knew that everyone lived in these conditions. Everyone was exposed to dirt and disease. Everyone had to hope that they would be lucky enough not to get seriously ill. Sleep is another area where medieval expectations were different. Modern people expect to get 7 or 8 hours of continuous sleep at night. We expect to fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up after a long period of rest. We expect that our sleep will be uninterrupted except by emergencies. Medieval people had different sleep patterns. Medieval people often slept in 2 or 3 separate periods during the night rather than one continuous period. Medieval people expected to be woken up by noise and other disturbances. Medieval people expected that sleep would be interrupted and fragmented. So when Margaret was woken up by the fight in the common room, and then again by her need to use a toilet, and then again by Alice's coughing, she was experiencing something that was more or less normal in her world. Sleep in the medieval world was not something that you could expect to be continuous and uninterrupted. Sleep was something that happened in fragments between periods of wakefulness. So even though Margaret didn't sleep much during her night at the inn, the fact that her sleep was interrupted and fragmented was not shocking or unusual. This is how sleep normally was in the medieval world. The psychology of medieval people also involved a greater acceptance of the things that couldn't be changed. Modern people believe that most problems can be solved if you just apply enough effort and money and technology. Modern people expect comfort and convenience. If things are uncomfortable or inconvenient, modern people look for ways to fix them. Medieval people had less expectation of being able to change their circumstances. Medieval people accepted the things that couldn't be changed. If the inn was cold, you couldn't change that. You had to accept the cold. If the inn was dirty, you couldn't change that. You had to accept the date. If there was a risk of violence, you couldn't change that. You had to accept the risk. This doesn't mean that medieval people didn't try to make things better. Hugh, the innkeeper, was constantly trying to maintain the inn in the best condition possible. He was trying to keep the toilets functioning. He was trying to make sure there was enough food. He was trying to prevent violence. But he also accepted that there were limits to what he could accomplish. He accepted that the inn was never going to be truly clean. He accepted that some guests were going to get sick. He accepted that some guests were going to cause trouble. And Margaret, the traveler, had a similar attitude. She was trying to get through the night as best she could. She was trying to stay warm. She was trying to get some sleep. She was trying to not get sick. But she was also accepting that the night was going to be uncomfortable and potentially dangerous. She was accepting that there were things about the experience that she couldn't change. Pause. As the night progresses toward dawn, the quality of the experience in the inn changes. The darkness begins to lighten almost imperceptibly. The sounds of the inn begin to change. The sounds of sleeping people gradually decrease as people begin to wake up. The sounds of the servants beginning their work gradually increase. Margaret is still awake as dawn approaches. She's been lying in the bed for more than 10 hours. She's closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but sleep hasn't come to any significant degree. She's exhausted. She's cold. She's uncomfortable. She's worried about her health. She's worried about being robbed. She's worried about many things. But as dawn approaches, she feels a sense of relief. The night is almost over. In a few hours, she and Thomas and Robert will be leaving the inn. They'll be continuing their journey. The worst part of the day, the night, will be behind them. The sky outside is beginning to lighten. The dark blue of the night sky is beginning to turn into the light blue and pink of early morning. The world outside is becoming visible. The cold is intense at this hour, just before dawn. It's probably the coldest it will be all night. Eleanor is awake early. She has to be up before dawn to prepare breakfast for the guests. She's been awake for most of the night anyway, dealing with the various sounds and disturbances of the inn. She gets up and makes her way to the kitchen. She's moving slowly, her body aching from exhaustion and overwork. She begins the work of preparing the morning meal. Hugh is also awake. He's checking on the condition of the inn. He's checking on the fireplace in the common room to make sure the fire is still burning. He's checking on the premises to make sure nothing was stolen during the night. He's preparing for the day ahead. Thomas is awake. He's checking on his goods one more time. He's satisfied that everything is still intact. He's relieved that no one has tried to steal anything. He's ready to continue his journey. Robert is also awake. He's dressed and ready to leave. He's eager to get out of the inn and continue traveling. He has found the night to be uncomfortable and strange, and is looking forward to being back on the road. Around 5 in the morning, Eleanor brings bread and ale to the common room. She's preparing the simple breakfast that will be served to the guests. The bread is hard and requires significant chewing. The ale is warm and tastes better than it did the night before. Margaret, Alice, and Grace make their way downstairs. They are all exhausted from the night. They are all looking forward to breakfast and then continue with their travels or their destinations. Margaret sits with Thomas and Robert and eats her breakfast. The bread is hard, but her body needs a nourishment. The ale is warm and provides some comfort. Everyone is talking quietly. No one has much energy for conversation. As breakfast concludes, people begin paying Hugh for their rooms and their meals. Thomas pays for his room and the meals for himself and Robert. Margaret pays for her room and her meals. Alice and Grace also pay. The money is exchanged. The transactions are complete. Everyone is settling their accounts before they leave. Pause. By the time the sun is fully up, Margaret and Thomas and Robert are preparing to leave. They are gathering their belongings. They are checking their weapons and their goods. They are preparing for the journey ahead. They have several more days of traveling. They have several more nights in inns just like this one, or possibly worse. Hugh is at the door, seeing them off. His thanking them for staying at his inn. His telling them to have a safe journey. His mentioning that they are welcome to stay again if they pass through this way again. This is all part of the standard farewell from an innkeeper. Hugh wants them to come back and spend money at his inn in the future. As Margaret leaves the inn and steps out into the fresh air, she feels a sense of relief. The night is over. She survived the medieval inn. She's uncomfortable and exhausted, but she survived. She's aware that she'll have to do this again. There are several more nights of travel ahead of her. She'll have to stay in more medieval inns. She'll have to go through this experience again and again. But for now, she's leaving this particular inn behind. She's moving on. She's continuing her journey. And that's enough. Behind her, Hugh is watching the guests leave. He's noting that they left the rooms in relatively good condition. He's noting that nothing was stolen, as far as he can tell. He's satisfied with how the night went. No serious violence. No major problems. Just the normal operation of a medieval inn. Eleanor is already cleaning the common room. She's removing the old rushes that are covered in food and filth and replacing them with fresh rushes. She's wiping down the tables. She's preparing the inn for the next group of guests who will arrive that evening. This is the rhythm of the medieval inn. Guests arrive. They spend the night in uncomfortable and potentially dangerous conditions. They leave. The inn is cleaned up. New guests arrive. The process repeats. For Hugh and Eleanor, this is their normal life. For the guests, it's an unfortunate necessity that comes with traveling. But for everyone involved, it's accepted as part of how the world works. Pause. As Margaret continues a journey on the road, she's thinking about the night she's just spent in the inn. She's thinking about how uncomfortable it was. She's thinking about how cold the room was. She's thinking about how dirty everything was. She's thinking about how afraid she was of being robbed or assaulted. But she's also putting the experience in perspective. She survived the night. No one was killed. No one was seriously injured. Her belongings were not stolen. She's continuing on her journey. In the context of medieval travel, the night in the inn was successful. It was not a great night, but it was acceptable. She knows that she has several more nights ahead of her. Several more medieval inns. Several more nights of cold and discomfort and potential danger. She's dreading those nights, but she's also resigned to them. This is what travel requires. This is the price of traveling in the medieval world. The road is cold and hard and lonely, but it's also quiet and peaceful in its own way. The road doesn't have the overwhelming smells of the inn. The road doesn't have the danger of being in close proximity with strangers. The road has its own dangers, but at least those dangers are the dangers of nature and weather and bandits, not the dangers of close quarters with people of questionable character. Thomas and Robert are also thinking about the night in the inn. Thomas is satisfied that his goods were not stolen. He's satisfied that nothing went wrong. He's thinking about the next and where he'll stay. He's hoping it's better than this one. He's knowing that it probably won't be, but he's hoping anyway. Robert is just glad the night is over. He's young and inexperienced at traveling. He found the experience of sleeping in a strange room with a middle-aged man who snores to be strange and uncomfortable. He's relieved to be back on the road where things make more sense. Hugh is dealing with the aftermath of the night. There's a problem with one of the windows in the upstairs rooms. It was apparently damaged by one of the guests. There's also the issue of some items that seem to have been stolen from the inn itself. There's always some loss. Hugh has learned to accept this as part of doing business. Eleanor is exhausted from her work. She's cleaned the common room. She's prepared breakfast. She's dealt with the guests. She's done the 100 small tasks that running an inn requires. She's ready to rest for a brief period before the evening guests start arriving and the whole process begins again. What we've learned about medieval inns is that they were places of discomfort and danger. They were unsanitary and cold and crowded. Violence could break out at any moment. Theft was common. Disease was a constant threat. But we've also learned that medieval people accepted these conditions as normal. They didn't expect comfort. They didn't expect safety. They accepted the medieval inn as a necessary part of traveling. They managed their discomfort as best they could. They adapted to the conditions. They survived. We've learned about the people who worked in medieval inns. We've learned about Hugh, who spent his life running the inn and trying to maintain some level of order and cleanliness. We've learned about Eleanor, who worked tirelessly to keep the inn operating. We've learned about the other servants who did the work of maintaining the physical space and preparing the food. We've learned about the different types of travelers who stayed in medieval inns. We've learned about Margaret, who was traveling to visit her sister and had to deal with the discomfort and danger. We've learned about Thomas, the merchant, who was bringing goods to sell and had to protect his merchandise. We've learned about Alice, the widow, who was traveling alone and dealing with illness. We've learned about Eleanor, the young servant, who was traveling with merchants and dealing with harassment and danger. We've learned that the medieval inn was a microcosm of medieval society. It was a place where different social classes came together. It was a place where normal rules were somewhat suspended. It was a place where danger and discomfort were constant. It was a place where people did what they had to do to survive and continue their travels. Pause. The medieval inn has disappeared. There are no more medieval inns operating in the way that Margaret would have experienced them. Modern hotels have replaced them. Modern hotels have electricity and heating and running water and clean bathrooms. Modern hotels have single beds for single people and beds for couples. Modern hotels have locks on the doors that actually work. Modern hotels have maid service that keeps the rooms clean. Modern hotels are quiet because they are well insulated. Modern hotels are safe because there's security and because violence is prosecuted by law enforcement. In some sense, the modern hotel is the best thing that could have happened to people who travel. No more medieval inns with their discomfort and danger. No more nights of shivering in cold rooms. No more sleeping in beds with strangers. No more constant risk of theft and assault. No more overwhelming smells and filth and disease. But in another sense, something has been lost. Medieval inns brought people together. They forced people of different backgrounds and different social classes into close proximity. They created a kind of community, however temporary and however uncomfortable. Medieval inns were places where stories were shared and connections were made, even if those connections were often brief. Modern hotels, with their individual rooms and private entrances and lack of common spaces, are more comfortable and more safe, but they are also more isolating. Modern travelers stay in their rooms. They don't interact with other travelers. They don't share meals in a common space. They don't gather around a fire and listen to stories. They are comfortable and safe, but they are alone. The story of the medieval inn is a story of how people adapted to difficult circumstances. It's a story of how people found ways to survive in a world that was uncomfortable and dangerous and disease-ridden. It's the story of how people accepted things that couldn't be changed and worked with what they had. In our modern world, we have so much comfort and convenience and safety. We have beds that are comfortable. We have rooms that are warm. We have access to clean water and clean bathrooms. We have access to medical care. We have protection from violence through police and law enforcement. But we often complain about minor discomforts. We complain if the hotel room is too small or if the temperature isn't quite right. We complain if the shower pressure isn't strong enough or if the bed is too firm. We complain about things that medieval travelers would have seen as unimaginable luxuries. Understanding the medieval inn helps us understand gratitude. It helps us appreciate what we have. It helps us understand that we live in unprecedented comfort and safety and convenience compared to previous generations of humans. And so, like the medieval travelers who endured the discomfort and danger of the medieval inn and continued on their journeys, you too can find rest now. You can close your eyes and let go of the weight of the day. You can sink deeper into the softness beneath you. The world we've explored tonight is a world that no longer exists. The conditions we've discussed are conditions that no longer exist. You have access to comfort and cleanliness and safety that medieval travelers could never have imagined. Pause. The medieval inn is gone, but the story of the medieval inn remains. The story of the medieval inn is a story of human resilience and human adaptation. The story of the medieval inn is a story of how people dealt with difficult circumstances and continued on their journeys. The story of the medieval inn is a story about the arc of human progress. Sleep well. Know that you live in a time of unprecedented comfort and convenience. Know that you have access to cleanliness and safety and warmth that would have been unimaginable in the medieval world. Know that the next time you sleep in a hotel, you're experiencing something that would have seemed like a miracle to a medieval traveler. Know that your comfortable bed and your clean room and your private bathroom are things to be grateful for. Sleep now. The night is yours. The darkness is safe. Your bed is clean and comfortable. Your room is warm. You don't have to worry about theft or assault. You don't have to worry about disease. You can rest peacefully and safely in a way that medieval travelers could never rest. And as you drift towards sleep, think about the medieval travelers. Think about Margaret and Thomas and Robert and Eleanor and Hugh and Alice and Grace. Think about the night they spent in the medieval inn. Think about how they endured the discomfort and the danger. Think about how they continued on their journeys the next day. Think about how they survived in a world that was difficult and uncomfortable and dangerous. And know that you, in your comfortable room with your clean bed and your access to modern sanitation and modern medicine, owe something to those people. You owe them gratitude for their resilience. You owe them understanding for the difficulties they faced. You owe them respect for their ability to survive and continue despite overwhelming challenges. Sleep well. Sleep peacefully. Sleep safely in the comfort and cleanliness and warmth that the modern world provides. And dream of a time long past when the medieval inn was the only option for travelers who needed a place to sleep. Pause. The night is drawing to a close. The story of the medieval inn is complete. The travelers have survived. Eleanor has cleaned the room. Hugh is preparing for the next set of guests. And you, safe in your own bed with your own comfort and your own safety, can now let go of the weight of the day and drift into sleep. Your body is heavy. Your mind is quiet. The softness beneath you is welcoming. The warmth around you is comforting. You can let go now. You can release all the tension. You can sink deeper into rest. The medieval inn is a place of the past. You are in a place of safety and comfort and warmth. You have everything you need. You have no reason to worry. You can rest now. You can sleep. Sleep.